Max Verstappen is still winning. That part has not changed, but something else has. After the latest drama involving Oscar Piastri, there was no celebration, no usual dominance talk, no confident smile about another race under control. Instead, Max Verstappen did something very different. He sent a warning. And not just to one team, not just to one driver, to all of Formula One. That is the part nobody expected. Because here's the paradox: Max Verstappen is still at the top, still winning races, still controlling the grid in a way very few drivers ever have. Yet somehow his tone is not confidence, it is concern. So the real question is simple: why would the most dominant driver in Formula One right now sound like he sees a problem coming? And more importantly, what does he see that everyone else is missing? Because when a driver like Max speaks like this, it is never random. It is never emotional noise, it is calculated, it is precise. And if you listen closely, this warning is not about a single race. It is about 2026 and what might happen when everything changes. But to understand why this warning matters, we need to understand what is really at stake. Because Max Verstappen is not just another name on the grid, he is the system right now. At this point in his career, Max Verstappen is not chasing Formula One. Formula One is built around him. Every race weekend, every strategy call, every championship conversation somehow comes back to one question: can anyone stop him? That is how dominant he has been. We are talking about a driver who has turned consistency into something almost mechanical. Lap after lap, race after race, the margins are not just wins, they are control. And when a driver reaches that level, something interesting happens. They stop reacting to the present, they start thinking about the future. Now, bring in the situation with Oscar Piastri, a young driver rising fast, aggressive, confident, and increasingly seen as one of the few names that could disrupt the current balance. On the surface, this looks like a classic Formula One storyline. A dominant champion meets a rising challenger. We have seen it before, but this time feels different. Because the reaction from Max Verstappen was not what you would expect from someone facing a new rival. He did not dismiss it, he did not hype it, he did not play mind games. He warned. That changes everything. Because when a champion warns instead of competes, it usually means the threat is not just on track, it is bigger than that, and that is where the stakes begin to shift. This is no longer just about who wins the next race. This is about who controls the future of Formula One. With the 2026 regulations approaching, the entire structure of the sport is about to evolve. New engine rules, new performance balances, new opportunities for teams to rise or fall. For most fans, that sounds exciting: a reset, a chance for competition. But for someone like Max Verstappen, it looks very different. Because when you're at the top, change is not opportunity. It is risk. Every new regulation is a question. Every adjustment is a potential weakness, and suddenly, dominance is no longer guaranteed. So when Max speaks now, he is not just reacting to Oscar Piastri or any single race result. He is reacting to a system that might no longer favor him. And if that system shifts, everything shifts with it. Teams that were behind could catch up, strategies that used to work could fail, control could disappear faster than anyone expects. That is why this moment matters more than it looks. Because this is not about a battle between two drivers, it is about the balance of power inside Formula One. And if you're starting to feel like this is bigger than just racing, you are not wrong. Because what Max Verstappen is reacting to might not be a competitor. It might be the beginning of something much harder to control. And once you see that possibility, the entire situation starts to feel a lot more complicated. If you can already feel that something is shifting beneath the surface, stay with this story, because the next layer is where things stop looking like racing and start looking like a system under pressure. At first, it looked like just another race reaction, a few comments after the session, a slightly different tone, maybe a hint of frustration, nothing unusual for a driver operating at that level. But then it happened again and again, different weekend, same underlying message. Max Verstappen was not just talking about performance. He kept circling back to something else, something harder to define, something deeper. If you go back and listen closely, the pattern starts to emerge, not in what he says directly, but in what he chooses to emphasize: the small details, the subtle shifts. After one race, he mentions how difficult it is to predict behavior under changing conditions. After another, he points out that the car does not always respond the way it should. Then suddenly he is talking about long-term direction. Not this weekend, not the next race, the future. That is not random, that is a signal. Now layer that on top of what is happening around him. Oscar Piastri is no longer just a promising name. He is becoming consistent, fast in different conditions, comfortable under pressure. And more importantly, he is starting to close the gap in areas where Max used to dominate without question. Corner exits, tire management, race pace under variable strategies. These are not headline stats, these are control metrics. And when those start shifting even slightly, it forces the leader to adjust. But here is where it gets interesting. Max is not reacting like someone being challenged by a faster driver. He is reacting like someone who sees the environment changing around him. Look at the tension between teams. Red Bull still leads, but the margin is not what it used to be. Development gains are smaller, competitors are more aggressive, strategies are less predictable. Meanwhile, teams like McLaren are not just improving, they are adapting faster. That difference matters because Formula One is not just about speed. It is about how quickly you can respond when the system shifts. And right now, the system is starting to move. So every time Max steps out of the car and says something that sounds slightly off, slightly cautious, slightly measured, it adds another layer to the question. Is this really about performance or is it about control slipping in ways we cannot fully see yet? Because if this was just about Oscar Piastri getting faster, the response would be simple: push harder, adjust strategy, fight back. That is what champions do. But that is not what we are seeing. We are seeing hesitation, not weakness, not fear, calculation. And calculation only happens when the variables are changing faster than expected. Now, add one more piece to this puzzle: the 2026 regulations, new engine concepts, different energy deployment systems, a shift in how power is managed across the race distance. For casual fans, it sounds technical. For drivers, it changes everything. Because the car you dominate with today might not even resemble the car you drive tomorrow. And if the foundation changes, the advantage disappears. That is the real pressure building here, not just from a rising rival, but from a future that is becoming harder to predict. At this point, it almost feels like the surface story is distracting from something much bigger underneath. Because every example we've looked at, every comment, every race, every reaction keeps pointing in the same direction. Something is shifting, and by this point, it almost feels like something bigger is breaking underneath the surface. What if this was never about Oscar Piastri? What if Max Verstappen is not reacting to a rival, but to the system itself? Because once you consider that possibility, the entire narrative flips. Suddenly, every warning makes sense, every reaction connects, every moment of hesitation becomes intentional. Think about it like this: imagine being the best chess player in the world. You have mastered every opening, every pattern, every strategy. You know how to control the board. You know how to win. Now imagine someone walks in and quietly changes the rules of the game. Not dramatically, not obviously, just enough that your instincts no longer guarantee the same results. That is what 2026 represents, and Max Verstappen sees it earlier than most. He is not worried about losing a race. He is thinking about losing the structure that made his dominance possible. That is the twist. The problem is not Oscar Piastri. The problem is that Formula One itself is evolving into something different. A system where the balance of power is no longer fixed. A system where adaptability matters more than control. And in that system, even the most dominant driver can become vulnerable. So when Max sends a warning, it is not directed at a competitor. It is directed at the direction of the sport. That is why it feels different. That is why it feels heavier. And that is why it matters more than any single race result. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. Because if this really is about the system, then there should be evidence, patterns that go beyond words, signals that show this shift is already happening. And this is where I want to hear your take. Do you think Max Verstappen is reacting to real pressure from drivers like Piastri, or is he seeing something deeper in where Formula One is heading? Because once you see it this way, everything he has said starts to feel less like frustration and more like a warning. And once you see it this way, everything he said suddenly makes sense. Now look at the data, and suddenly this is not just a theory anymore. When you step back and track how Max Verstappen has been talking over the past races, a clear pattern starts to form. Not just frustration, not just reaction, but consistency and concern. He keeps pointing at the same direction, the future. Not once, not twice, repeatedly. And in Formula One, repetition is never accidental, because drivers at that level do not speak casually about long-term changes unless they are already feeling the early effects of them. Take his comments around the upcoming regulation shift. Every time the topic of 2026 comes up, there is a noticeable difference in tone. Less confidence, more caution, that alone is a signal. But it goes deeper. Look at race patterns. In previous seasons, Max Verstappen controlled races in phases: strong start, stable middle, dominant finish. The structure was predictable because the car responded exactly how he expected. Now, there are small inconsistencies, moments where the balance is not perfect, moments where tire degradation becomes harder to manage, moments where strategy becomes reactive instead of proactive. Individually, these are minor. Together, they're evidence because dominance in Formula One is built on predictability. And predictability is exactly what starts to disappear when a system is about to change. Now, compare that with the rise of drivers like Oscar Piastri. He is not just fast, he's adaptable. Different tracks, different conditions, different strategies, and he keeps finding performance. That is the type of driver that benefits the most when regulations shift, not the one who mastered the old system, the one who adapts fastest to the new one. And this is where the third layer of proof comes in. Team behavior. Red Bull used to operate with certainty. Decisions were clear, strategy calls were confident, execution was sharp. Now, there are moments of hesitation, moments where decisions take longer, moments where alternatives are considered more often, again, small details. But in a sport where milliseconds decide outcomes, small details reveal everything. Put all of this together, and the picture becomes clear. This is not about a single rival. This is not about one season. This is about a shift in how Formula One works. And Max Verstappen is already reacting to it, which brings us back to the original question. What was he really warning about? Not Oscar Piastri, not McLaren, not even Red Bull. He was warning about the future of Formula One itself, a future where dominance is no longer stable, a future where control is temporary, a future where even the best driver in the world has to fight uncertainty instead of managing it. That is the real message, and once you understand that, everything clicks into place. His tone, his reactions, his timing, it all connects. Because this is not fear, this is awareness. Now, here's the part most people are not talking about. When a driver like Max Verstappen starts thinking like this, it usually leads to one of two outcomes. He adapts faster than everyone else and creates a new era of dominance, or he steps away from a system that no longer aligns with how he wins. That is the decision point approaching 2026. And based on everything we've seen so far, he is already preparing for both possibilities. That is the insight hidden behind the warning. He is not reacting in the moment. He is positioning himself for what comes next. So, what does that mean for the future? It means 2026 might not just be another regulation change. It might be the moment where the entire power structure of Formula One resets. New leaders, new dynamics, new rivalries, and maybe a very different version of Max Verstappen. Because if the system changes enough, even the most dominant driver has to redefine himself. And that is where things get really interesting. Because the next chapter of this story is not about what Max Verstappen is doing now. It is about what he chooses to do when everything changes. Does he adapt and stay on top? Or does he walk away before the system forces him to? That is the question that will define the next era of Formula One. And if you want to see how this plays out, how the grid shifts, how the rivals respond, and what decision Max Verstappen actually makes when 2026 arrives, you already know you will want to follow this story all the way through. Because the answer is coming, and when it does, it is going to change everything.